Kia ora everyone, and welcome to the Facebook Live session. My name is Jonah, and I'm the Before School Referral Nurse for Auckland and Waitemata area. And I'm very excited to be facilitating our live session today. So today we're continuing the second of the fourth series on engaging play for young children with a focus on question, what supports a child in being ready for school, physically, socially, and intellectually. So today we have our special guest, Dr. Barbara Backshall, back with us. She has 40 years of experience in early childhood education. So welcome, Dr. Barbara.
Kia ora, Jane. Kia ora, everyone.
So, Dr. Barbara, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work in early childhood education?
Certainly. I started my career as a teenager doing a kindergarten diploma and working in kindergartens and then in early childhood centres, moving into leadership roles and into a time where I feel really privileged to have worked in universities and studied and researched around early childhood education right through to a doctorate level, with a real passion to see and value play as a way that children learn. So that's been a large part of what I've done during my time. My doctoral thesis was around sociocultural theory, which is really that we learn through being with people, and also with a context of early childhood science, because I've been a science early childhood and primary lecturer as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, science connects so much around understanding, why things happen, isn't it? Especially with children too, and how their mind works and how we can best sort of support them. That's so wonderful. We are so incredibly lucky to have you today, and for you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Yeah. So Dr. Barbara, the transition from preschool to school is obviously a very new journey for our tamariki. Could you please tell us what is useful for our tamarikis and our families to know about school?
What I think is really, really important to perceive and to think about is that it's a transition. It's journeying into something new. And when we journey into something new, we try and find out as much about it as we can. And so I think that's what we need to do for our children, is actually make them familiar as possible with what's going to be happening and what a school actually is. And so it's about physically visiting the school, walking in the holidays or in the weekend in the playground, talking and visiting and seeing what the toilet looks like, what a classroom looks like. So all these words, they're used to the word classroom being used maybe for an early childhood centre, and so they're thinking that. And so it's allowing them to see that it's different. It's the physical things of being able to eat out of a lunchbox and knowing how to open packets, or which foods to eat first. That sort of thing. It's around meeting the people if you can. Now, COVID's been a bit of a blip for that, and some schools have closed down the rituals they've had around introduction sessions, but I think they're beginning to open up a lot more now, especially now that illnesses of winter as well as COVID are over. So if you get a chance to do a school visit with your child, it means that you too have a picture of what the setting really looks like, and when your child talks about it or asks you questions about it, you can make those connections with the physical place, getting to know who your teacher is, if you can, getting to know some of the children that will be at the school. What do I do at recess time, at morning tea time, at lunchtime after I've eaten my lunch? Sort of saying which parts of the playground you'd be playing on, and what kind of things would you do with your friends. So having those conversations so that it's a lot more familiar for them, I think is a really good idea.
Absolutely wonderful. And that just makes the transition to school so much easier too, isn't it? Just knowing the routines, as well as knowing, what's sort of coming ahead. Yeah.
Actually, Gina, that's a really good point, because it's actually also about telling them the routine of the day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And how do early childhood centres help our tamariki in that transition? Is there a special sort of uh, kind of a ritual in place, or something that they do, perhaps have children visiting school as well from early childhood centres?
Yes, they do. And a lot of schools, a lot of centres will have pictures up about the local schools, and sometimes we'll do visits to different schools. It depends how many schools a centre feeds into. So if it's feeds into just one or two, then they might do that. But and there's some really good advantages to visiting with centre children and knowing the other children that are going to a centre, but most schools will prefer it if the parents did the visit so that they can make that relationship with the family as well. So we tend to have photos where we can of school grounds and of teachers when we're fully functional again after this COVID time. You won't see a lot of that at the moment because we haven't had the same contact as we've had in the past. But that will begin again, and where it's challenging for parents to visit, and we have a relationship with the school. Then with some schools we do visit, and some schools will allow early childhood centres to take several children that aren't actually going to that school, but to get a picture of what a school is like.
Oh, definitely. That all definitely helps, doesn't it? Yeah. Lovely. Now, talking about physical aspects of getting ready for school, you mentioned a little bit about play in there. So what can parents do to help support their children physically get ready for school?
I think physically confident, that hand-eye coordination, playing ball, even manipulating and squeezing Play-Doh and playing with Play-Doh strengthens the fingers, helps with get hands ready to do, tiny pincer grip, etc. A bit of drawing so that they're getting used to the idea that a mark on a paper actually has meaning, or that they can make shapes, and then after a while that those shapes can be particular symbols to mean different things. I think it's about being physically active with children, taking them out to places, and a lot of oral language, because it's in the oral language that they develop and understand concepts and words that link so clearly into the reading and writing that happens at school.
No, absolutely. Yes. In terms of like early childhood education and the support that they give in terms of helping children with their physical skills, are there any criteria and guidelines, say, from Ministry of Education for all the schools to ensure that they're possibly giving the right sort of support in there for children?
Yes, there are, and it's a little bit different than is expected, I think, and that it's that we have in our own early childhood curriculum, Te Whāriki, a really good connection into the competencies for learning, the learning dispositions, and into the subject knowledge. And so you'll see a lot of connections with the areas of play into how it can support the different subject areas later. I talked about my interest in science, and that you would see science in the outdoor play and the push and the pull and the physics of how things move, and you'd see it in the gardening, and you'd see it in mixing different mixtures together and knowing what a solid and a liquid is, melting a piece of ice, all sorts of very simple play things that actually lead to understandings that can then have abstract concepts related to different subjects associated with them. So it's also around the language that teachers would be using alongside. But never underestimate the value of motivating curiosity, problem solving, trial and error, having a go, allowing children to have their own thinking and thoughts. And that's why we often talk about a child-centered curriculum. It's not that children are free to do whatever they like. There's definitely safety boundaries, but there's this idea that if they are choosing things and making decisions, they're working their minds and thinking to be able to use them in that way once they get into the school subjects. So there's lots of connections, but not so much doing exactly what they do at school, but doing maths in very fun, informal ways, doing maths through nursery rhymes, doing maths through counting how many things they might be playing with or how many things in a book. So all of the subjects are there, but they're worked within the areas of play that children have. And then a huge emphasis on literacy through oral storytelling, puppet storytelling, and lots of reading of books that supports all of that development.
That sounds wonderful, and it seems like perhaps that the teachers are there to with the resources and materials and supporting the children to have their own imagination and their own thinking, isn't it? And of course, when other children are involved as well, that gives them opportunity to connect with other children, socialize, share, take turns, and everything like that, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does. It gives them opportunities to trial and error that as well, and for teachers to work alongside and support those skills when they're necessary. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Now, I had a little question around sort of large motor skills. What play activities specifically out in the environment can support with those large motor skills with children?
I think ball skills, playing in a park. If you're out at the beach in the summer, it's those digging. It's going for walks. It's going for walks in places that aren't smooth paths, so that they learn about balance and coordination, etc. as well. I love the connection that I learnt about from a friend related to mathematics and geometry in outdoor play, and where she did her master's thesis related to that. And what they discovered was the children that had more outdoor play and talked about the shapes in their environment were far better at primary school geometry than other children, because it was all about the physicality of having a go and being in the environment and experiencing it, because young children learn with their bodies, with their whole bodies. And what they do actually builds concepts for them. And so as they're working with round shapes, they're learning about round, especially if we just add the word. We don't do anything special to teach children everyday language except for use language. So we don't do anything special in early childhood, except we do have little experiments and things sometimes to add a bit of fun or to stretch someone's thinking. But mainly it's about adding the words to the play activities that children are doing that makes a difference, and they gain those maths concepts and other concepts related to literacy and science and the arts, etc.
Absolutely. Sounds like you almost adding words to the emotions and the experience that they're going through, isn't it? Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Now, some of the children that we visit, even through before schools, they've sort of never been to preschool. I haven't started. And because of COVID as well, some of our parents have been a little bit hesitant to send their children to school. Do you have any recommendation around where they can go to get ideas of activities to help promote those skills for their children?
For overall skills, I love our BestStart website, where we've got the 16 areas of play. You've got a bit of me talking about those areas, and then you've got all sorts of ideas about how you can develop those. In the actual website, you just go into deeper parts to look at different things, and we're always adding to that. But for social skills in particular, I think it's around two things for me. It's adults that talk to children, so they're getting that oral language and they're getting that conversation backwards and forwards and learning about that. So how to have a conversation, they can be learning that from adults. I think it's about, if you've got bigger families, having opportunities for children to play together, or a play group. I know Plunket sometimes has play groups in different areas as well. So I think it's socializing with other children is really, really important as a way of introducing to how that's going to be at school when children are cooperating and working together, and also in the playground learning how to socialize with other people, because it's a huge part of who we are as people is actually socializing for fun and for well-being. But also, if you think about it, we often socialize to learn our everyday knowledge. We might ask someone down the road that we know well what they think about, and then, like we might choose our power company that way. We might do all sorts of things, and children are learning those skills as they learn to relate to each other. But I think it's fine if children haven't been to a centre. I think it's great if they have that experience, but if there's reasons for not, or there's preferences to not, then I think it's about finding those relationships in your community where your child can relate to at least one or two other children and have that experience of negotiating through play and cooperating through play to learn how to have ideas with each other. If it's about turn taking, it's often called sharing, but we've started to use the word turn taking because you never have the thing, you never both have the object that you want to play with at the same time. What you're doing is you're learning to take turns. And I often say one of the best ways to do that is to play games with children as a family. So there's all sorts of games where children have to wait for someone else to have a turn, and so the conversation goes, now it's Josephine's turn, so let's wait for Josephine to have her turn, and then it will be your turn. And so they're learning about that back and forth of negotiating and having opportunities both to talk and to have action in the game. And ball games are like that too. If you're playing ball backwards and forwards and there's more than two people, then you're looking at now you'll just need to wait because the ball is now going to this person. So all those physical games are also teaching about social skills at the same time.
Absolutely, and it's fantastic how parents are able to guide and also be consistent on supporting the children around how to share, because I think that's one of the very main questions lots of our parents who have toddlers and even preschoolers they ask. They're having a tough time with their child not sharing and what they can do. So thank you so much. Those tips definitely help, especially with those questions. Wonderful. Now we have a parent that have asked questions related to toileting. And while we're talking about the physical side of the things, as well as the social side of things, I thought I'd pitch in and ask. So we have a parent who have said we're still having a lot of toilet accidents at 4 3/4 of age. And she's asked, can she still send him to school?
I think you can, but you need to have an honest conversation with your teacher, and you need to think of strategies and ask the teacher about strategies for the child coping at school, because it's also about one of the things you have to learn at school that's really important in terms of those physical skills is that you're used to being able to go to the toilet whenever you like. And now you're having to find your time at morning tea, lunch. There's systems and teachers will allow children to go to the toilet in between, but most of the time they're wanting children to learn how to manage the time that they go. But if they know that there's a child that needs a bit of extra support, then they will be more aware of that and cater for that. And it's about doing things like having extra pairs of underpants. Certainly teachers would not make a big deal of it. It would be respectfully handled. So I think the best thing to do is to actually talk that through with the teacher. And also I would say, as an encouragement, 4 months is a long time in a child's development, and often when you think it's not going to happen in time, and I guess you'd know that as a Plunket nurse, that people are wanting the next milestone, and it doesn't happen, and then all of a sudden it does happen. So it would probably only be for a short time.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. And I also like the bit that, parents, go in there and open up with the teacher and have a good discussion about what's going on for the child as well, isn't it? Are there any support, say, through school nurse as well in this area? We have heard quite a lot about supporting children to be dry and having plans around.
Yes, there is a school nurse, and that's the teacher would direct in that way as well to the school nurse in terms of that. Yeah, because there's lots of different reasons, and it's about knowing the reason, and working with the family. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And now, Dr. Barbara, we just wanted to know a little bit about school and school terms. We have lots of parents asking, my child's going to be 5, mid of the year, maybe July, August, and, it's sort of in between the terms as well. So in that case, should they start school as soon as they turn 5, or should they wait for the start of the term next year?
The decision really belongs to the parent, and you can look at whether you think your child is ready for that. And readiness is that socialization and confidence in themselves to be in a school setting. Apart from that, I think you need to know what your local school does these days, because we've just started a couple of years ago cohort intake. So some schools only take children once a term now, and other schools carry on taking children when they turn 5 or shortly after, if they want to come and enroll at that time. So you have to know what your school's doing, but that you don't have to start right at 5. And I think it's looking at how close to an end of a term.
Yes.
And if you're starting in the last week of term, and then there's 2 weeks holiday and you're starting again, that can be quite emotional for some children, in terms of they've almost have to do the introduction twice. So those are the things, or too close to Christmas, the last 2 weeks of the final term. Those are the times that I would look at, thinking about, is this a good time to start? But again, it depends on each school and how they run their programs. And it's a good question to ask the school, is when is a good time for my child to start, given your routines? Because schools can vary a little bit about how they, when a reception class is full and so they start a new class, so you're in a smaller group, all of those things become considerations. So the school itself will have a good idea about, is this a good time, or shall I wait for next term? So I think, as well as your own instinct as a parent and feeling, and a couple of months can make all the difference socially, with confidence with young children. Those are all the things that I'd consider if I was thinking about when a child is to start school.
Oh, That's wonderful. And in terms of like the age aspect, some parents decide to wait until, their children are 6 years of age. What are your thoughts and recommendations on that? Is it the same as what they feel that where the children are at? Because sometimes we see that parents sort of back off and they feel like, they just need that little bit of confidence and a little bit of push, especially from maybe teachers or the nurses that visit them to let them know, how wonderfully their children are doing. Yeah.
Yep. I think there are so many different ideas about when to start school, and some countries choose 6 as the age rather than 5, and some countries choose 4. So a lot of it is very, very cultural, isn't it? And what you're used to in terms of your own education and what your expectation is around that. So there are as many cultural factors involved in choosing when to start as there are educational. And I would say that if I felt that a child needed more time, it's very brave in New Zealand society to decide not to send them. But if they are receiving a rich education at home or in an early childhood centre, then you may want to just keep them there for that little bit longer.
Okay.
But most people in New Zealand start their children when they're 5.
Yes.
And what I should mention too is with the cohort, what that government regulation allows is for children to start before they're 5 within that term. And it's only with schools that have chosen to do cohort intake. So they're taking all the children they're going to take in that term at the beginning of a term or partway through. And then they don't take any more children till the next term, same time. And only some schools are doing that, whereas other schools, it's the same as it's traditionally been in New Zealand, that you can rock up once they're 5 anytime and enroll and choose to be part of the school. But enroll early so that you get that chance to do those what I call introduction rituals, where you can go and visit and have some conversation and get to know the teacher.
Yes, absolutely. And how as early as you recommend to go and enroll?
I would say a term before they turn 5.
Which is, a good term is a good sort of
because then you can fit into whatever the school has in terms of their timing of when they have sessions for introductions to schools. If you choose to go a bit later, which is absolutely fine, you can do that. There's no time is not acceptable, but you can do that. But then you might miss out on the introduction. That's why I'm thinking a whole term, because then you can schedule a couple of visits if the school does that, and you can do those walkthroughs, the playground several times yourselves on a weekend or in a school holiday to familiarise yourself too. So it gives you that time to do the introductions if you do it early.
Yeah, definitely. And that just, it prepares them even more, doesn't it? And making children more comfortable, as you get talking with them about getting ready for school and starting school. Yeah. All right. I'll delve a little bit into the social side of the things. Could you please tell us, because of the COVID over the last sort of 3 years, what have you seen out in the community in terms of impact it's had on social development of our preschoolers?
That's a really good question. And I think it has affected the time that children have had to practice socialization skills in some instances. I mean, if you're in a big family, then you may have that opportunity, but for others there was less opportunity. And so it's needed time, both for social and actually for physical skills, when we were inside so much during that COVID lockdown times, especially in Auckland, because we were in lockdown for a bit longer than other parts of the country.
We were, and there were at times where we just couldn't even leave our house, wasn't it? You even, I think at one point it was just even had to, or people worried about even going out for a walk and things like that.
So we simplified our physical environment and BestStart Early Childhood Centres on purpose. We read the research from around the world and what educationists were saying. We also did the same with social skills. So you just simplify some of the games we played for a while until children got back into that rhythm again. I think too, when we look at social things, we're also looking at children's emotional well-being. And we've brought in a lot of, in education in general, we've brought in a lot of mindfulness activities that allow children to think about their social well-being. Because if they're feeling well in themselves, they're more confident to interact with other children. And so it's the physical running and using energy to, and for some people that's active resting, active having time for well-being. And then for other people, it's learning about relaxation. So it's been about listening to quiet music, having corners in the centre where children can withdraw and just be by themselves and read a book, or just play by themselves and then return to the play. Because if you haven't had as much time, you may find a whole day really difficult to be totally interactive all the time. In fact, most of us in our jobs, we're not like that all day long. Otherwise, we come home and we just want to shut off, or we go for a long walk, or whatever we can to bring about a sense of balance and well-being. And so there's been a lot of work with children and thinking in that way, because often if adults are stressed, children pick up on that stress. And so they're feeling that the time has been different. And so it's how do we bring that fun and relief into their play that builds their confidence. And I love the whole idea within play of playfulness with children. And I think it's something families do really well, is that playfulness that's culturally right for a particular family is just so important to do that. It's so important to do that in terms of building children's understanding that well-being is important. And once you're feeling that well-being, then socially you're more ready to go back into the world and be part of it and enjoy it as stimulation instead of stress. Yeah, I think all those things are really important post-COVID.
Absolutely. And I imagine, parents are able to also role model that and incorporate that as part of their everyday lives, isn't it? Like going out for a walk together as a family. Yeah.
We certainly saw more of that over COVID. Once we were allowed out more, there were more bikes, there were more people walking in the park with their children, and that was a real sign of the times in terms of really positive, healthy things to be doing as a family. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I guess while, out and about, there's just so much more that you can learn from the nature as well, isn't it? Including sounds, touch and feel of the plants, flowers. Yeah.
Absolutely, Gina. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah, wonderful. Now, I've had a parent with a question. She says, my child plays rough with his friends and siblings at preschool. I'm worried with less teachers at school, this could become an issue. So how could we support this parent in terms of, supporting the child, in terms of appropriate play, having boundaries in place?
And I like the idea of play coaching, and I think parents can do that as much as teachers. And all play coaching is talking through, when you did that, um, Helen didn't actually like it. And so how could you have communicated that differently? And it's talking those through, not when a child is hyped up or angry, but afterwards, later. It's like us. If we get excited, then it's very hard to take advice. But when we calm down and our minds are calmer, and someone talks to us about a situation, we're able to reflect on it far, far deeper. And so it is with children too. So it's actually taking moments to have those discussions where you feel you need to, and not expecting the change to be immediate, because if it's a personality habit, it takes time to change. And so if you have to do the same coaching 5, 6, 10 times, that is normal. The other thing I would do with something like that is actually talk to the teacher about it. And then they're aware of it, and they can tell a duty teacher, or they can be aware of triggers that might bring about a boisterous interaction within the classroom, and dissipate that. Because I sometimes think, we often talk with younger children, with 2 and 3-year-olds, we talk about redirection. And people think, well, children have to learn how to cope with that. But actually the redirection is showing them the coping. And so that redirection before a situation gets too boisterous is a way of changing the behaviour gradually. So you're almost interceding before that action escalates, and then they're learning to move to just that level of the action. So it's actually a strategy of thinking about what my child is doing, and what do I think I need to coach change in, and then having the discussion or making an instruction suggestion at the time. Hey, I know you think that whacking it with that stick's going to work, but how about we try kicking it today? So I'm actually looking at what are the other options he could do instead of the boisterous particular play that's happening. So I think it's twofold. It's about coaching other options, and it's about talking to, if you think it's going to be an issue, don't be scared to have that conversation with the teacher. Because I think you're working in partnership. I think that I love that idea, and I loved it as an early childhood teacher when I was teaching, is to work in partnership with parents, because it's a privilege to work with someone else's children. And so it's that partnership of working out what the best learning is, because the social learning, as we all know, is just as important as the intellectual learning for a child, especially a 4 to 5-year-old child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose with children spending, so much of their time at preschool, having things consistent there, as well as at home, is going to, bring about positive changes as well, isn't it? A bit faster, knowing that you're on the same.
And talk, if they're going to early childhood, talk to the teacher. I had a wonderful conversation with a beginning teacher just 2 weeks ago, where the very same thing, the child suddenly started getting aggressive at the centre, and the teacher talked to the parent about it and said, is it happening at home? Because we just want to know what's the best way to work with you to work through this, because he's not done this before. And they said, yes, he is. And the teacher said, can I just share with you 2 techniques I've learnt and see what you think? And then they tried it at home, they tried it at the centre, and they couldn't believe how quickly it worked. It doesn't always work like that. But I said, do you realise what you've done is empowered the teacher, because you had the education about those strategies, and the parents didn't, and you shared that with them, and now they're empowered to use those strategies themselves. And he went, I didn't realise. But it is as simple as that sometimes, in discussing with each other so that you get a similar strategy happening both at the centre and school and at the home. So it's a partnership. You're working together.
Absolutely. And that's how it is as well, out there, as our role in Before School Check as well, to ensure that we work in partnership with, parents as well as teachers out there in the early childhood centres. Yeah. Now I'm just going to delve a little bit into the topic of intellectual readiness. So intellectually, where should we expect children to be at around the time when they start school?
I like to look at intellect a little bit differently, and I like to look at those competencies, or we often call them in early childhood dispositions, and the school calls them learning competencies, and we call them learning dispositions. So it's an active confidence to be curious, to want to solve problems, to ask questions, to feel confident, to do a bit of trial and error. And most children will really want to do that. If they're building something and it doesn't work, then they have another go. When they're younger, they might have a little bit of a frustration tantrum first, but they have another go. So for me, intellectually, it's about that creativity and thinking. And that's why we like play so much, because we talk about open-ended play where children are choosing and making decisions, so they are using their mind so that they can use their mind more once they're at school. So there's definitely intellectually that idea of being able to think, problem solve, have a go, make a choice, make good choices, learn about risks and manage risks. And then there's the very simple things. And from what I understand, it's about the beginning of we call them in early childhood, one of our learning outcomes is around recognizing signs and symbols. And some of those symbols could be letters, and they can be letters in home languages as well. They don't need to just be English letters. But often the beginning of that is noticing signs on the road, or the McDonald's sign, or so those signs and symbols are the beginning of knowing that a symbol has meaning. And so it's the beginning of that and the beginning of recognizing letters. And that often just comes from seeing that people are reading the words. And then some children gain that curiosity to look at the words sooner, and that's fine. And if children don't, that's fine too. And numeracy, we kind of say can count 1 to 9 or recognize 1 to 9. So it's those really beginning stages. Know some colours is another thing, and beginning to look at shapes. So that I guess intellectually that some of those symbols are familiar when they get in the classroom and they're not totally strange. But it's finding everyday ways to introduce them informally with children, because when we learn something as an adult, post our studies, when we're learning as we need something. So it's in a context that makes sense. So it's finding the context that makes sense for the child is how they grow in curiosity and confidence to actually stretch their understanding about signs and symbols, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Barbara. And not all children are into, for example, writing or learning how to write.
Yeah.
Not necessarily wanting to learn letters and numbers and things like that. But, by doing other fun activities, like you say, they might not even realize that they're learning, but that they're actually learning about symbols, isn't it? And learning to recognize letters. Are there any activities out of your 16 areas of play that you would recommend for intellectual development of children or helping them thrive in that area?
I am a great advocate for the arts, the visual arts, because they're creating and making things. So making things out of boxes, collage where they're putting things together to make a pattern, or an abstract pattern, or a actual an image of some kind. Music and movement, because that's an expression, and even drama, because pretend play is where children practice and make sense of things that happen to them every day. I loved when the Rugby World Cup was here in New Zealand. That's a long time ago now. And all the children outside, well, not all of them, but lots of them were doing the haka. And that's what I mean by they were practicing, pretending to do what they saw sports people doing on the rugby field. And it's the making a hangi, doing a umu, cooking dinner, pretending to catch fish and gut it and then fry it on a little pretend frying pan. All those things are making connections with the brain and developing concepts and ideas. And as well as ideas, that meaning making has a sense of well-being and belonging as well, because it says something about modern day culture, and I'm part of it, and I'm doing it with my family and with my centre, with my school. So play is a huge part of that. And the visual arts are like, if they can't express it in language yet, they can express it through visual arts. So having a go and being creative is very stimulating for the mind. And the other thing really is that oral language, nursery rhymes, singing. I think 4 to 5 is where you really start the recognising rhymes and having fun with it. Those sorts of things as well. All of that builds the intellect and understanding of different ways of communicating and forms of language, which are really conceptual and are created through thinking.
Absolutely. I also like the idea of how, children are getting to, or they're participating in, activities that support them and helping them understand their sense of self, their community, the culture. Absolutely. And about the rugby event as well, and how they're participating, in doing haka and the dance. And I've also seen other, other cultures being represented as well, especially going around to centers. You can see flags from different cultures. I guess they talk about other things like food from different cultures, dressing up as well in different cultures and things like that.
I think, Jonah, that's why schools and early childhood centres often ask parents what they do in the weekend. It's so that we make that connection to a context that makes sense for the child in the play. I remember one teacher saying to me, centre manager saying to me recently, that in the summer she had a couple of families that always went camping. So they put a tent up outside in their playground and got a few pots and pans, and that developed into a whole cooperative play. So there was lots of social learning, but there was also learning about practicing and making meaning from the pretend play through to what they were doing on the weekend with their parents. And you could add numeracy, you could add literacy to that with some signs. You can look at other ways that then the learning can be positioned, the intellectual learning can be positioned within the context of camping. And schools do that too. They look at context to learn maths, context to learn science, context, because we go from the known into the unknown in our thinking. And so if something is completely unknown and we haven't got an aspect to link into, it is so much harder to learn than if it's in a context. So that we talk a lot in education now about culture, language, and identity, because it's in that. And I talk about everyday or modern culture. It's just the everyday things that families do are really important to be linked with what's happening in terms of that intellectual learning. So it makes sense. So the counting is related to something they know, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. I see that we've spoken for quite a long time now, 49 minutes, but we've learned so much from you today, Dr. Barbara, on play and how to support children in, developing physically, socially, and intellectually. I loved your 16 areas of play with BestStart. That's something that, we're also able to share with our Facebook whānau out there, so that, they're able to go away. And it's just so wonderful, with each of the videos, you've got children playing behind you, and there's all the videos explaining about, how the children are playing with the objects and what they're learning, what they're feeling, what they're sensing, and what the teachers are actually sitting there and guiding them and supporting with. So we'll share that today. And there was also a brochure on starting school by Ministry of Health. We'll also share that so the families are able to get some helpful information. Now, you mentioned a little bit about a program called, there's a program for supporting children start school. I now can't remember.
Oh, we call that Be School Ready.
Be School Ready.
Yeah, and Be School Ready at BestStart, lots of B's there.
Yeah.
It's really just about focusing in on the nearly fives and the kinds of things that would support their curiosity and build into project work, or building on those competencies of thinking, sustaining something for a period of time. So like just doing it concentration for longer periods of time, not forcing it, but just allowing children to do something a little bit more complex to build on those skills and build on those concepts. So it's not necessarily before 5 school books, but it's before 5 learning experiences that would just build on the competencies and intellect where the child's at. Yeah.
Wonderful. And how can our families access that program? Is this specific to BestStart, or?
It is specific to BestStart, and at the moment we're just redoing it. So I think it's not so available in a form like a website yet for parents. It's more that we're doing each centre's looking at that individually, and that would probably develop more along that line in the future. So I'd watch that space really, but most centres would have some form of learning that's appropriate for children that are nearly 5. The idea is that you work with the child where they're at, and that's exactly what the school will do. So no matter what, schools and early childhood centres, what we do is we accept children and families where they're at, and we work with those children and empower them to love learning, so that they grow that love of learning and confidence about using those skills to learn, for lifelong skills really. So it is really important that parents feel confident that whatever teacher's working with your children, we're just going to accept them for where they're at, and we're going to stretch and grow their learning in really positive ways.
Absolutely. And just as all adults, children have their own strengths, don't they? And they bring in, their own unique skills and personalities as well. Lovely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge today on engaging children with play and helping support children build physical, social, and intellectual skills. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Gina. Thank you.